He's seizing. I need air in his lungs now, Zoe Bellamy shouted, her cleaning cloth hitting the polished marble floor as she sprinted forward. Sharp gasps erupted from the cluster of black-suited bodyguards. Just minutes earlier, Hiroshi Yamada, the reserved head of the Yamadagumi and one of the most feared men in New York's underworld, had been standing at the far end of the opulent 60th floor meeting room. His voice had been calm, measured, almost cold as he discussed terms with his Tokyo counterparts through the secure video link. Then mid-sentence he stopped. His hand, slow, deliberate, rose to his throat. His breath caught. The room fell into a suffocating silence as his body locked once, twice, and then crumpled onto the white carpet like a puppet with its strings cut. At first, no one believed it. The bodyguards froze. 5 men in tailored suits, each trained to kill without hesitation, each earning more in a month than Zoe made in a year. Someone murmured in Japanese, "Impossible." Another hissed into his wrist mic, "Medic to 60. Now, then the truth hit. Hiroshi Yamada wasn't moving. His lips were shifting from pale pink to a dusky, terrifying blue. But Zoe didn't hesitate. She pushed through the wall of muscle and expensive cologne, her worn sneakers squeaking against the floor. "Stop. You cannot." One guard barked in accented English, stepping into her path. "Move." Zoe shoved past him. "I know what this is." But no one cared. Hiroshi lay on his side, one arm twisted beneath him, his eyes half open and rolled back. The pinpoint constriction of his pupils. She'd seen it before. Poison. Neurotoxin. His chest wasn't moving. Zoe dropped to her knees beside him, her heart hammering so hard she could barely hear her own voice. "Mr. Yamada, can you hear me?" she whispered, panic rising in her throat, her hands already reaching for his jaw. She pressed 2 fingers to his neck, barely a flutter. No time. No choice. She forced his mouth open and sealed her lips over his. The first breath was desperate. The second was prayer. She tasted copper, blood from where he'd bitten his tongue. Her hands cradled his head, tilting it back as she forced air past the rigid lock of his throat. 1 breath. 2. 3. The room was screaming around her, but all she could hear was the silence in his chest. Then he convulsed. His body arched violently beneath her hands, and he choked, a wet, horrible sound, before dragging in a massive, shuddering breath. His eyes snapped open, black and unfocused, locking onto hers for a single electric moment. Zoe pulled back, gasping. "He's breathing. He needs a hospital. Now." Hands seized her from behind. Iron grips on both arms, yanking her to her feet so violently her vision blurred. "Let go of me," she shouted, twisting against them. A man stepped forward. Tall, older than the others, with silver streaking his temples and eyes like frozen steel. His voice was a blade. "You have touched what is not yours to touch." Zoe's stomach dropped. "I saved his life." "Lieutenant Kenji," one of the guards said quietly in English, deferring. Kenji's gaze never left Zoe. He looked at her the way someone might look at a stain on sacred ground. "Take her." "Wait, no, please, I have a daughter." The world went black as a hood slammed over her head. The room was cold. Not the clean cold of air conditioning, but the deep, bone-settling cold of concrete and fear. Zoe couldn't see. The hood still covered her face, rough fabric scratching against her cheek every time she turned her head. Her wrists ached where the zip ties bit into her skin. She'd lost track of time. Minutes. Hours. Her daughter, Maya, God, Maya would be waiting for her. The after-school program closed at 6. What happened when no one came? What happened when? The hood was ripped off. Zoe blinked against the sudden flood of white fluorescent light. The room was small, windowless, empty except for the metal chair she was bound to and a single table. And across from her, standing with his arms crossed and his face carved from contempt, was Lieutenant Kenji. He didn't speak. He just stared at her, his silence a weapon. "I didn't do anything wrong," Zoe said, hating the tremor in her voice. Kenji placed a photograph on the table. It was blurry, grainy surveillance footage blown up and printed. But the image was unmistakable. Zoe, her lips pressed against Hiroshi Yamada's, her hands cradling his face. It looked intimate. It looked deliberate. It looked like a kiss. "You contaminated him," Kenji said, his English precise and venomous. "You, a stranger, a servant, pressed your mouth to the master's. Do you understand what you have done?" "I saved his life," Zoe shot back, her fear crystallizing into anger. "He was dying. He wasn't breathing. I did what I had to do." You are a disease on the master's honor. Kenji leaned forward, his hands flat on the table. The question is whether you are a foolish disease or a purposeful one. Zoe's blood went cold. What are you talking about? The poison, Kenji said softly. How did you know it was poison? How did you know what to do? Who sent you? No one sent me. The triads? The Koreans? Who paid you to touch him, to finish what the poison started? I'm a janitor. Zoe's voice cracked. I clean floors. That's it. I saw the signs, pinpoint pupils, respiratory failure. I used to. She stopped herself. Kenji's eyes sharpened like a hawk spotting prey. Used to what? Zoe's heart slammed against her ribs. She couldn't tell him. If they dug into her past, if they found out about her medical training, about why she'd left the hospital, about Maya's condition and the records she'd buried. Nothing, she whispered. Kenji circled her slowly. You have a daughter, yes? Maya Bellamy. Age 7. Attends PS 118. Zoe's breath stopped. Terror flooded her veins, white hot and paralyzing. Don't you dare. You will tell me the truth, Kenji said, or I will find out myself. And I will make sure the child understands what her mother truly is. Zoe stared at him, her mind spinning. She opened her mouth to scream, to beg, to fight. The door opened. A younger man in a dark suit stepped inside and handed Kenji a phone. Kenji's expression flickered. Annoyance, then something else. Surprise, maybe. He lifted the phone to his ear. A pause. Then, hi. Understood. He ended the call and looked at Zoe with something that might have been disappointment. Or fury. She couldn't tell. The master has given an order, Kenji said flatly. Keep her alive. He turned and walked out, leaving Zoe alone in the cold white room, her daughter's name still echoing in her skull. The apartment was beautiful. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the Manhattan skyline. Cream-colored furniture that looked like it had never been sat on. A kitchen stocked with food Zoe would never have been able to afford. Fresh orchids on the marble countertop. It was a cage. Zoe stood in the center of the living room, her arms wrapped around herself, and counted the exits. One main door, locked from the outside. Windows 60 stories up, no balcony. She'd already checked. A guard stood just beyond the door. She'd heard his radio crackle twice in the last hour. On the bed in the pristine bedroom, someone had laid out clothes. Designer labels. Silk blouses, tailored slacks, a cashmere sweater that probably cost more than her rent. A note in clean script. Please make yourself comfortable. Zoe picked up the sweater, felt its absurd softness, and dropped it back onto the bed. She went to the closet, found her janitor's uniform, wrinkled, stained with the day's work, and put it back on. The fabric was rough and familiar. It smelled like cleaning solution and her own sweat. It smelled like her life. She sat on the couch and stared at the door. Hours passed. No one came. She found her phone on the kitchen counter, but it had no signal. The Wi-Fi required a password she didn't have. She was cut off. Maya. God, Maya. Zoe's hands shook as she searched the apartment for anything she could use. A landline. A computer. Anything. In a drawer, she found a tablet. It was unlocked. She opened the browser with trembling fingers and searched her own name. The first result made her stomach drop. Mysterious incident at private NYC office. Billionaire hospitalized after alleged affair with janitor. The article was vague, no names, but the implications were poisonous. Sources claim the woman, employed as cleaning staff, was found in a compromising position. Witnesses describe an intimate encounter. Questions arise about motive and access. They were burying her, rewriting what happened into something sordid and shameful. Zoe closed the tablet and pressed her palms against her eyes. Somewhere far above, or maybe below, she couldn't tell, Hiroshi Yamada was recovering and watching. She didn't know it yet, but a camera was embedded in the smoke detector above her head. Hiroshi sat in his private study, his body still weak, and 4 taped to his arm, and watched her on a monitor. He watched her refuse the luxury. He watched her pull on the janitor's uniform like armor. He watched her search for a way out, then crumple onto the couch with her face in her hands. He didn't understand her. And that, more than the poison, more than the assassination attempt, unsettled him. Hiroshi couldn't sleep. Every time he closed his eyes, he felt it again. The suffocating darkness, the paralysis, the moment his breath stopped. And then her. The janitor. He didn't know her name then. He barely knew it now. Zoe Bellamy. 28 years old. Single mother. No criminal record. Employed by elite maintenance services for 3 years. Unremarkable. Invisible. Except she wasn't. Kenji's report sat on his desk, full of suspicion and barely concealed rage. She knew too much. She acted too quickly. She must be investigated further. I recommend permanent severance. Permanent severance. Kenji's polite term for execution. Hiroshi stared at the report, then pushed it aside. He couldn't explain it. Not to Kenji, not to himself. But something was wrong with the narrative. The cultural dishonor, the contamination, the whispers of espionage. It was all noise. Noise designed to obscure something. He reached for his phone and dialed. Tanaka, he said when the line connected. His advisor. One of the few men he trusted without question. I need the raw footage. All of it. From the moment I entered the conference room until the moment I was taken to the medical wing. A pause. Kenji has already provided. I didn't ask for Kenji's edited version. Hiroshi interrupted, his voice ice. I want the unedited security feed. Every camera. Every angle. Understood. Hiroshi ended the call and leaned back in his chair. His body still ached. The poison, tetrodotoxin, the doctors said, derived from pufferfish, nearly impossible to trace, had left him weak. But his mind was sharp. Someone had tried to kill him. And in the chaos of survival, Kenji had focused all his fury on the one person who had saved him. Why? 2 hours later, Tanaka delivered the footage on an encrypted drive. Hiroshi dismissed him and locked the study door. He watched the entire sequence 3 times. The first time, he watched himself. The moment the poison hit. The sudden lock of his muscles, the collapse. He'd been helpless. Defenseless. The second time, he watched his men. Their shock. Their paralysis. Trained killers. And not one of them moved to help him. They'd frozen. The third time he watched her. Zoe Bellamy didn't freeze. The moment he fell, she moved. She didn't hesitate. She didn't ask permission. She shoved past men twice her size and dropped to her knees beside him. Her hands were steady. Her movements were precise. She'd known exactly what to do. And in the split second before she pressed her mouth to his, Hiroshi saw it. The choice. It wasn't instinct. It wasn't panic. She'd looked at him, truly looked at him, and decided he was worth saving. No one had ever looked at him that way before. Hiroshi paused the footage on her face. Her eyes were wide, terrified, determined. She'd risked everything in that moment. And Kenji had repaid her with imprisonment. Hiroshi picked up his phone. Tanaka. Yes, Yamada-san? I want the truth about the woman who saved me, Hiroshi said, his voice quiet and absolute. Not the lie Kenji is selling. Do you understand? Yes, sir. And Tanaka? Sir. Transfer her custody immediately. She is my medical and cultural consultant from this moment forward. He paused. And tell Kenji he will answer to me. Hiroshi ended the call and looked back at the frozen image of Zoe Bellamy's face. He didn't understand her yet. But he would. If you've read this far, you're part of something rare, a community that doesn't just scroll past, but actually stays for the story. Most people have already moved on. But you're still here. And honestly, that means everything. If you want to see where Zoe and Hiroshi's story goes next, if you want to be part of the small group that gets each chapter as it's written, subscribe. We're building this together. Don't let the algorithm bury you before you see how this ends. The door to Zoe's gilded prison opened at dawn. She was awake, had been for hours, unable to sleep on the too soft couch, her mind spinning through scenarios of Maya alone, confused, scared. When the lock clicked, Zoe was on her feet instantly, her body tense. But it wasn't Kenji. It was Tanaka, the quiet man with silver-rimmed glasses who'd been present during the interrogation, but had never spoken. He bowed slightly, a gesture that felt bizarrely respectful given that she was a prisoner. Miss Bellamy, he said, please come with me. Where? Zoe demanded, but she was already moving toward him, desperate for anything that wasn't this cage. The master wishes to see you. Zoe's stomach nodded. Hiroshi Yamada, the man whose life she'd saved, the man whose honor she'd apparently destroyed. She didn't know whether to be relieved or terrified. They rode the elevator in silence, ascending to a floor Zoe had never seen before. The doors opened onto a private study, dark wood, low lighting, the scent of green tea and something else. Incense maybe. And there, standing by the window with his back to her, was Hiroshi Yamada. He looked different than she remembered. No longer convulsing on the floor, no longer blue-lipped and dying. He stood tall, composed, dressed in a simple black shirt and slacks. But there was a tension in his shoulders, a stiffness that suggested his body was still recovering. "Leave us," Hiroshi said without turning. Tanaka bowed and retreated. The door closed with a soft click. Zoe's pulse hammered in her throat. She was alone with him. For a long moment, Hiroshi said nothing. Then finally he turned. His eyes locked onto hers, and Zoe felt the force of his full attention like a physical weight. He studied her the way someone might study a puzzle they couldn't solve. "You saved my life," he said. It wasn't a question, but Zoe answered anyway. "Yes. Kenji believes you poisoned me first. That your intervention was theater designed to earn my trust and infiltrate my organization." Zoe's hands clenched into fists. "Kenji is wrong." "I know." The simple statement stunned her into silence. Hiroshi moved to his desk and tapped a key on his laptop. The screen came to life. The security footage, frozen on the moment before Zoe had sealed her mouth over his. "I have watched this 43 times, Hiroshi said quietly. "I see no assassin. I see no spy." He looked at her. "I see a woman who made a choice." Zoe's throat tightened. "I couldn't just let you die." "Why not?" Hiroshi's question was genuine, not rhetorical. "You didn't know me. You knew the risk. You could have walked away." "No," Zoe said, her voice steadier now. "I couldn't." Hiroshi studied her for another long moment, then nodded, as if she'd confirmed something he'd suspected. "You have medical training," he said. "More than basic CPR. You recognized the poison. You knew the signs." He tilted his head. "Why is a woman with your knowledge cleaning floors?" Zoe's jaw tightened. "That's my business." "It was," Hiroshi agreed. "But you made it mine when you put your mouth on mine in front of my men." His tone wasn't cruel, just factual. "I cannot let you go, Miss Bellamy. You understand that." Zoe's breath caught. "My daughter is safe," Hiroshi interrupted. "She has been staying with your neighbor, Mrs. Chun. I have ensured her school fees are paid for the next 6 months, and that she has everything she needs." The relief was so sudden and overwhelming that Zoe's knees nearly buckled. "I am not Kenji," Hiroshi said. "I do not punish people for saving my life. But I do require answers. And I require your cooperation." He gestured to a chair. Zoe, still reeling, sat. "I am offering you a position," Hiroshi said. "Not as a prisoner. As my personal medical and cultural consultant. You will attend sensitive meetings. You will observe. You will advise. Your invisibility, the fact that no one sees a janitor as a threat, is an asset I intend to use." Zoe stared at him. "You want me to spy for you?" "I want you to survive," Hiroshi corrected. "Because if Kenji had his way, you would already be dead. The only reason you are alive is because I ordered it. And the only way you stay alive is if you are indispensable to me." It wasn't a threat. It was a fact. Zoe swallowed hard. "And if I say no?" Hiroshi's expression didn't change. "Then you are no longer indispensable." The silence stretched between them, heavy with unspoken consequences. Finally, Zoe nodded. "I want to see my daughter. Once a week. No surveillance. No guards." Hiroshi considered this. "Twice a week. Supervised at a distance for her safety, not to monitor you." "Fine. Then we have an agreement." Hiroshi extended his hand. Zoe looked at it, pale, steady, the hand of a man who'd been dying 4 days ago, and shook it. His grip was firm. Warm. "Welcome to my service, Miss Bellamy," Hiroshi said. "And for what it's worth, thank you." It was the first time anyone had thanked her. Zoe nodded, her mind already racing ahead to what came next, to Kenji's rage, to the deadly world she'd just agreed to navigate. But for the first time since the hood had slammed over her head, she felt something other than fear. She felt like she had a chance. The next morning, Tanaka brought her to Hiroshi's private floor again. But this time, the atmosphere was different. Less interrogation, more negotiation. Hiroshi stood by a low table where tea had been prepared. He gestured for her to sit. Zoe hesitated, then lowered herself onto the cushion across from him. The formality felt strange, almost absurd given that days ago she'd had her mouth on his. "Before we proceed," Hiroshi said, pouring tea with practiced precision, "I need to understand who you are. The real version, not the one on your employment file." Zoe's fingers tightened around the warm cup he'd placed in front of her. "Why does it matter?" "Because I am about to place you in rooms where a single misstep could start a war," Hiroshi said calmly. "I need to know if you will break under pressure." And I need to know what leverage my enemies might find if they dig into your past. Zoe stared into the pale green tea. She'd spent 3 years building her invisibility, and now this man was asking her to dismantle it brick by brick. I was a medical student, she said finally, her voice quiet. Johns Hopkins. Top of my class. I was going to be a surgeon. Hiroshi's expression didn't change, but she felt his attention sharpen. What happened? I got pregnant. Zoe's throat tightened. The father left before Maya was born. I tried to keep going, but she was sick, really sick. A rare autoimmune condition that required constant monitoring, constant care. I couldn't afford childcare and medical school. I couldn't afford the treatment and the tuition. She looked up at him. So I chose her. You dropped out. I disappeared, Zoe corrected. I had student loans I couldn't pay. I had hospital bills that would have buried me. So I changed my name, took jobs that paid cash, and became no one. Her voice hardened. I became invisible. Because invisible people don't get their wages garnished. Invisible people don't lose custody of their children to the state. Hiroshi was silent for a long moment, studying her with those dark, unreadable eyes. That is why you knew, he said finally. The poison. The symptoms. I spent 2 years in clinical rotations, Zoe said. I've seen tetrodotoxin poisoning before. Rare, but unmistakable. Hiroshi nodded slowly, as if pieces of a puzzle were finally clicking into place. He set down his tea. You have seen my weakness, Miss Bellamy, he said, his voice low and startlingly honest. I was helpless, dying, vulnerable in a way I have never allowed myself to be. He met her gaze. Now I must use your strength. But I need to know that strength is real. Zoe's breath caught. It wasn't a threat. It was something far more dangerous. It was trust, tentative and fragile, being offered like a blade that could cut both ways. I didn't save you to get something from you, Zoe said. I saved you because I couldn't watch someone die when I had the ability to stop it. That's all. I know. Hiroshi's expression softened, just barely. That is why you are still alive. Kenji sees conspiracy. I see something far more rare, integrity. He paused. I cannot offer you safety, Miss Bellamy. The world I operate in does not allow for it. But I can offer you purpose, visibility on your own terms, and protection for your daughter that goes beyond money. Zoe looked at him, really looked at him, and saw past the cold exterior to the man beneath. Someone who'd survived an assassination attempt and couldn't trust his own inner circle. Someone who was as trapped by his position as she'd been by hers. What do you need from me? She asked. Honesty, Hiroshi said. Observation. And the courage to tell me the truth even when it might displease me. He hesitated, then added, No one else does. It was the most human thing she'd heard him say. Zoe nodded. Then I'll do it. But not because you ordered it. Because you asked. Something flickered in Hiroshi's eyes. Surprise, maybe, or respect. Thank you, he said. And just like that, the dynamic shifted. Not servant and master. Not prisoner and captor. Partners. Fragile and uncertain, but real. The summit was held in a private room at an upscale restaurant in Chinatown. The kind of place with no sign on the door and a host who vetted every guest. Zoe wore simple black slacks and a fitted blouse. Hiroshi's instruction was clear. Be present, but unremarkable. She stood 3 steps behind Hiroshi as they entered, her eyes down, her posture deferential. To everyone in the room, she looked like an assistant. Forgettable. But she saw everything. The triad boss, Lu Chun, sat at the head of the table, flanked by 2 enforcers. He was older, gray-haired, with sharp eyes that missed nothing. Across from him sat Hiroshi, composed and unreadable. And to Hiroshi's left, rigid with barely concealed fury, was Kenji. Kenji hadn't looked at Zoe once since she'd arrived. But she felt his hatred like heat radiating from a flame. The negotiation was tense. A territorial dispute over shipping routes through the port. Hiroshi was offering a compromise, shared access, split profits. Lu was skeptical. You ask me to trust you, Lu said in Mandarin, his voice smooth and dangerous. But trust is earned, Yamada-san. And I hear whispers that your house is not as stable as it once was. Hiroshi's expression didn't flicker. Whispers are the language of cowards. I deal in facts. Lu smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. Then let us speak facts. The conversation continued, switching fluidly between Japanese, Mandarin, and English. Zoe's role was to listen, to observe. But as the minutes passed, something nagged at her. Kenji was too quiet. Too still. Then she saw it. A server approached with a tray of documents, contracts to be reviewed. He placed them in front of Lu first, then Hiroshi. Standard procedure. But as the server leaned forward, his sleeve rode up, and Zoe caught a glimpse of a tattoo on his inner wrist. A coiled snake. The same symbol she'd seen on a photograph in Hiroshi's briefing file. The mark of a rival faction within the Triads, one that Lu had violently purged years ago. Her heart slammed against her ribs. The server wasn't Lu's. He was a plant. Zoe's eyes flicked to Kenji. He was watching the server with the faintest trace of satisfaction. She moved before she could second-guess herself. "Yamada-san," she said quietly in Japanese, stepping forward. "Forgive the interruption. May I review the documents first?" A precaution. Every head in the room turned to her. Hiroshi's eyes narrowed, but he nodded once. Zoe took the papers from the server's tray, her hands steady despite the adrenaline screaming through her veins. She scanned the first page, then the second. There, in the fine print of the third clause, a phrase that didn't match the verbal agreement. A clause that would give Hiroshi's organization full liability for any incidents on the shared routes. It was a trap. If Hiroshi signed this and something went wrong, a hijacking, an arrest, it would all fall on him. Zoe looked up, meeting Hiroshi's gaze. "The terms have been altered," she said calmly in English, so everyone would understand. Section 3 does not reflect the verbal agreement. Lu's expression went cold. He snatched the papers from her hands and read them, his face darkening. "Who prepared these?" Lu demanded, his voice a whip crack. The server stammered. I was given them by." Lu didn't wait for him to finish. He snapped his fingers, and his enforcers seized the man, dragging him toward the door. Lu turned to Hiroshi, his anger palpable. "This is not my doing, Yamada-san. Someone seeks to divide us." Hiroshi's gaze slid to Kenji, cold and penetrating. Kenji's jaw tightened. "I received those documents from your office, Lu-san. If there is sabotage..." "Enough!" Hiroshi's voice cut through the room like a blade. He stood, his presence commanding absolute silence. "We will investigate. Separately. And we will reconvene when the truth is clear." It wasn't a request. It was a dismissal. As they exited the restaurant, Hiroshi said nothing. But as they reached the car, he paused and looked back at Zoe. "You saved me again," he said quietly. Zoe met his eyes. "That's what you pay me for." But they both knew it was more than that. The confrontation came 3 days later, in Hiroshi's private study. Lu had completed his investigation and sent his findings. The falsified documents had been commissioned by someone within the Yamadagumi. The trail led directly to Kenji. Hiroshi summoned both Kenji and Zoe. The tension in the room was suffocating. Kenji stood rigid, his face a mask of controlled fury. Zoe stood across from him, her pulse hammering but her expression calm. "You accused her of espionage," Hiroshi said, his voice dangerously soft. "You imprisoned her. You attempted to sabotage a critical negotiation and frame her for it. Why?" Kenji's eyes blazed. "Because she is a contamination, a stain on your honor. You allow this woman, this outsider, to touch you, to stand beside you, to whisper in your ear." His voice rose. "You dishonor everything your father built." "My father is dead," Hiroshi said flatly. And his way of thinking died with him. Kenji's hand moved to his waist, toward the concealed blade Zoe knew he carried. "She has poisoned your mind," Kenji hissed. "Just as she poisoned your body." "No." Zoe's voice cut through the room, clear and unwavering. She stepped forward, meeting Kenji's gaze without flinching. "You are the true dishonor, Lieutenant. You value tradition over truth, pride over loyalty. You would have let your master die rather than allow someone like me to save him." Kenji lunged, but Hiroshi was faster. He moved between them, his hand catching Kenji's wrist in an iron grip. The blade clattered to the floor. "Touch her," Hiroshi said, his voice lethal, "and I will end you myself." The room went absolutely silent. Kenji stared at Hiroshi, shock and betrayal warring on his face. "You choose her over your own blood?" "I choose competence over fanaticism," Hiroshi said. "I choose survival over suicide." He released Kenji's wrist and stepped back. "You are relieved of duty, effective immediately. You will leave New York tonight. If I ever see you again, it will be the last thing you see." Kenji's face twisted with rage and humiliation. For a moment, Zoe thought he might attack anyway, might choose death over dishonor. But Tanaka appeared in the doorway, flanked by 2 guards. Kenji looked at Zoe one last time, his eyes full of venom. Then he turned and walked out, his footsteps echoing down the hall. When the door closed, Zoe exhaled shakily, her legs suddenly weak. Hiroshi turned to her, his expression unreadable. "Are you hurt?" "No," Zoe said. "I'm fine." "You were right about him," Hiroshi said quietly. From the beginning, Zoe looked at him. This man who'd just chosen her over decades of tradition and loyalty. "Thank you," she whispered. Hiroshi nodded. "You belong here now, Miss Bellamy. Not as my attendant, as my equal." And for the first time since the kiss that had changed everything, Zoe believed it. 6 months later, Zoe stood in front of the mirror in her office. Her actual office, with her name on the door and a window overlooking the city, and adjusted the collar of her tailored charcoal suit. She barely recognized herself. Chief of Foreign Affairs for the Yamatagumi. It was a title that would have terrified her a year ago. Now it fit like a second skin. There was a knock at the door. "Come in," Zoe called. Maya peeked her head in, grinning. She was 8 now, healthier than she'd been in years, her treatments covered by the best doctors in the city. "Mom, Mr. Yamada says the car is ready." Zoe smiled and ruffled her daughter's hair. "Tell him I'll be right down." Maya scampered off, and Zoe took one last look in the mirror. She thought about the woman she'd been, invisible, terrified, hiding from the world. She thought about the desperate kiss that had saved a life and ended hers. Except it hadn't ended her life. It had begun it. Downstairs, Hiroshi waited by the car, impeccable in a dark suit. When he saw her, something softened in his expression, something that still surprised her, even now. "Ready?" he asked. "Always," Zoe said. They were attending a gala, a public event where foreign dignitaries and business leaders would mingle, where Zoe would stand beside Hiroshi, not behind him, where she would be seen. As the car pulled away from the building, Zoe looked out at the city lights and felt something she hadn't felt in years. Peace. She'd lost her anonymity. She'd lost her invisibility. But she'd found something far more valuable. Purpose. Power. Partnership. And against all odds, happiness. The kiss wasn't the end of my life, Zoe thought, watching the city blur past. It was the inciting incident of my true life. I stopped hiding and finally learned to lead. Beside her, Hiroshi glanced over, and for just a moment he smiled. And Zoe smiled back. "You made it. All the way to the end. Most people don't. They scroll, they skim, they move on to the next distraction. But you stayed. You saw Zoe's journey from invisible janitor to indispensable partner. You witnessed Hiroshi choose truth over tradition. And honestly, that makes you part of something rare. This isn't just a story you consumed. It's one you experienced alongside a small, dedicated community that actually cares about the craft. If you want more stories like this, raw, intimate, real, subscribe. We're building this together, one chapter at a time. And we'd hate to lose you now, just when things are getting interesting.